So Spotify over the past number of years has seemed to be a good deal to a lot of people. You could pay maybe $9 or $10 a month and you'd get access to unlimited music. But in recent times, a lot of people have begun to question Spotify as to whether it was actually a good deal at all to begin with. We've seen some pricing increases. We've seen continued delays in the high resolution service. And also there's a question as to whether you actually need unlimited music at all. Hello to you, Al. Hope everything's well. Well, I guess what I'm interested in is whether we're stuck with Spotify and is there any alternatives here?
Oh, good morning, mate. Look, there are alternatives. There's physical media and non-physical media. Now, you and I, we're mob wives, mate. We like to wear the fur coat, but we don't necessarily want to know where it's kind of come from. So that's where you've really got to be a conscious consumer when it comes to music, in my opinion. I mean, if you look at my music collection, I've got a huge amount of CDs and vinyl, and that's an investment for me, man. I'm happy to spend $20 on a CD, $30, $40, $50 on a record if I know that there's more percentage of that money that's actually going to go to the artist. But for most people out there, mate, the bang for buck lies within the streaming services.
So let's look at some of the key arguments here.
Let's talk about the cost first of all. There's a few factors, aren't there, really? And if you're looking at it from an average punter's point of view, in Australia, you're paying $14 for a solo subscription for a month, and that gives you 3,500 streams. And I don't know about you, mate, but I'm not listening to 3,500 streams at the best of times. But we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place in terms of our listening experiences, because cost does come into a factor, mates.
Yeah, so Spotify has over a number of years, I think, bumped up the cost. They've had different packages that they've introduced, and what that's mean is that they've increased what's called their gross margin. Now, in accounting speak, in layman speak, what that really means is that they've been able to get away with bumping up pricing without necessarily passing that on to the musicians and just in terms of royalties. And we've seen in much more recent times that they've been able to pass on, let's say, annual increases. This happens when you have a service that is more or less dominant in an area and they get away with it because they can. So my question's going to be, is there going to be an inflection point? Are we going to be used to these, dollar increases every single year, and then at some point will be like the frog in the boiling pot? Are we going to find that it really isn't a good idea at all?
I completely agree there, mate. And at the end of the day, I mentioned before, we're caught between a rock and a hard place. So if you love coffee and coffee goes up 50 cents a cup, you're still going to pay for it. So I think Spotify are pretty clever and they pretty much know this, really. They've got a certain percentage of the market, and as long as they kind of increasingly, slowly, increase the amount per month, we're just going to keep paying for it. I can't see there really being many alternatives.
The second argument here about Spotify is that there is delays in the high resolution product. Now, the high resolution product was flagged as far back as 2017. There was another announcement in 2021 in relation to it, but we still see delays. And I guess my question with all of this is, A, does it matter? I mean, do most people really care about high resolution audio? And B, if you're Spotify, do you need to? Does it really matter that you do that? Is it going to add value? That's what it's going to come back to when Spotify are thinking about how to launch this.
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting space because it's been on the cards for a while. I mean, I remember Billie Eilish came out and Spotify released a quick interview with her talking about high-res music, but since then it's been pretty quiet. There's lots of articles and conversations out there, but it's really only for people like yourself and myself, mate, that are really keen to see this high-res introduction into Spotify, and we're probably prepared to pay a little bit more. But for the average punter who's just kind of listening to Spotify in general and Bluetoothing it to a little speaker or listening to headphones at the gym, they're probably A, not going to really notice the difference, and B, not really care. So it's the upper echelon of music lovers who probably really are wanting to fly the flag here, mate.
I think there is a growing quadrant of the market who are interested in high resolution music. Some of the technical limitations for having streaming that has been compressed probably no longer exist, just with access to bandwidth. I think this is something that might bite Spotify at a particular point in time. They're continuing to grow their base, but there might be a time when there will be maybe a turn against it for potentially the delay. So the third one is whether or not consumers are actually needing unlimited music. The thought of having access to all the music in the world is great, and it's great for people like ourselves, but the punters out there might not actually need such a service. Now, there was a survey, that piece of analysis that got done in 2023 that suggested that the average subscriber was listening to 3,200 tracks per year. Now, I would argue that a lot of people would be listening to a lot less than that, and those actual tracks that they'd be listening to wouldn't actually change all that much in a given year. So there is a little bit of a what's the point of having access to unlimited, especially if you could say that you could be charging a lot less for the service if it was just a small cohort of tracks that you were getting access to potentially.
Yeah, geez, that's a really interesting conversation. The only way I could see like a Spotify doing that is maybe limiting it to, say, genres. So if you paid, $8 a month and you had access to indie and folk, or maybe two or three of your favourite genres, I think that would be a really interesting kind of space to be in, and whether that would increase revenue for Spotify or not. But I mean, there's 100 million songs out there, mate. I guess the benefit of having that many songs and the algorithm that Spotify has is it can open up your doors to different artists that you may not have heard of before, and it actually gives the opportunity for more artists, of course, which there are in the world now compared to back in the 60s and 70s of the glory days, to actually have their music exposed. So that's my kind of thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing to that I've got is that there is still the free tiers, the ad-supported tiers that people have access to. So I think we've spoken about active and passive listening, and I guess from an active point of view, maybe it's just those tracks that you love. Those are top 1,000 tracks that you're not going to really move on. And if you're looking to explore different tracks, well, maybe there's other alternatives that might not necessarily need you to pay the fee every month. And remember that adds up. This is going to be basically what you pay for the rest of the time, as opposed to basically owning the copy of the music to listen to and not having to pay anything more. Let us know in the comments what your general feelings are about Spotify. Do you think that it's time to look at the alternatives, and do you feel like you're starting to get potentially ripped off or not seeing the value of the service compared to actually purchasing the CD or purchasing the digital download outright? Let us know in the comments. Let us know what you think.